So this past week, Motorola took a load of us tech spods out to the desert. Not to execute us cartel style and bury our weasel-like bodies in a hole in the sand, thankfully, but rather to test out its fresh new Moto Edge 50 Pro. And this jazzy wee blower will cost you €699, probably about the same in British punds. So it's a more affordable alternative to a lot of other flagships and considerably cheaper than Motorola's own top-end blower, the Moto Edge 50 Ultra. As long as you don't mind making some sacrifices in the performance and camera departments. Now, I've had my SIM card slapped inside of the Motorola Edge 50 Pro for just over a week now, so here's my in-depth review, and for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do poke subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! Now, the Moto Edge 50 Pro is your typical 6.7-inch smartphone, but thankfully Motorola's light and curvy design, complete with those super skinny bezels, make the Edge 50 Pro look and feel more compact than it actually really is. I certainly like that sandblasted aluminium frame, that looks really smart, and the rear end is coated in vegan leather in your choice of black or this jazzy purple number, which I believe Motorola is referring to as Luxe Lavender. And this shit is definitely giving me some major Mad Madam Mim vibes, and if that creaky old reference means absolutely nothing to you, well, get yourself educated on a classic bit of Disney. Beats the tits off of Wish and all that recent guff. The Edge 50 Pro boasts this lovely rubbery soft touch finish which makes for fantastic grip. So between that and the subtle curves around the edges, this thing really does have some top-notch hand feel. 5 soggy Kleenexes out of 5. But unfortunately, that fuzzy surface also absolutely adores pocket lint, or rather pocket lint adores it. So you find yourself constantly scraping bits off with your fingernails, providing you haven't bitten them to the crull like I have. And Motorola is also offering the Edge 50 Pro in a special edition patterned pearl unibody option, which I'd imagine, just like this Luxe Lavender version, will attract rather mixed reactions. I do appreciate how that camera bump around back isn't really a bump at all, it's more of a gentle sloping curve. Although you do somewhat inevitably still get a bit of jangly action if you're using the Moto Edge 50 Pro while it's resting on a table or desk. Motorola didn't specifically say if they slapped any Gorilla Glass on the front end of the Moto Edge 50 Pro. However, after just a week of using this as my full-time phone, I can already see some very light scratches on that panel. There's no pre-installed screen protector either, so I'd highly recommend slapping one on yourself. But thankfully, like most phones around this price point, you've got IP68 water and dust resistant, so the Moto Edge 50 Pro can get fully submerged in a bit of water, and as long as you towel it off good and proper, it's all good. Now, to unlock the Moto Edge 50 Pro, you've got an in-display optical fingerprint sensor housed down here near the bottom edge of the screen. I found this has been absolutely fine, even if my fingers are relatively clammy or moist, it still does the job. And naturally, you've got a good bit of face unlock action to back that up. And as with other Motorola blowers, you've got a stock-ish version of Android 14 on here, with Moto's freshly designed Hello UX smushed over it, with very similar features to previous Motos, but it is a bit more spangly now. You can have a completely regular Android-style notifications bar, otherwise you can have an iOS-style control center, which is all the rage these days. And you can kind of personalize quite a lot here on the Moto Edge 50 Pro, including a bit of edge lighting. You can choose from a small selection of colors and exactly what it will notify you for. You can even tweak the fingerprint animation, although you've only got a choice of 3 options here. And yes, you can even create your own wallpaper images using a good bit of AI. But Motorola's effort is a bit more advanced than just selecting random words to form a sentence. What you can do is actually shoot a photo of any pattern that catches your eye, and then the phone will generate a variety of patterns based on that image. That one's a particularly good one. That one's actually kind of funky. Of course, this feature works a whole lot better with regular patterns, and the idea is that you have a wallpaper that matches your outfit, for instance. At least if you're wearing something a bit more exciting than a plain white £5 H&M t-shirt. You've also now got greater control over your lock screen, so you can edit the big old widget that pops up there and also the notification style. However, I've got to say the Android experience here on the Moto Edge 50 Pro can be a wee bit dodgy. So for instance, for some reason on the Moto Edge 50 Pro, there's absolutely bugger all sign of an always on display, or if there is one on here, it's very cunningly hidden away. And also, for about a day or two, every time I opened up an app, for some reason it wouldn't open full screen, it would open up in a floating window, which really got my tits really rather fast. But thankfully, it stopped doing that just as suddenly as it started, maybe because it realised my face was turning beetroot purple. However, I am much happier when it comes to Motorola's own apps. So slapped here on the Edge 50 Pro, you'll find the full library, including Moto Connect for streaming your apps or games or whatever to a big telly or some other screen. And of course you've got ready for support on here, so you can quickly pair up with the likes of a laptop and transfer files, share your apps, or even use the Edge 50 Pro's cameras as a webcam. And Moto Secure is well worth diving into as well. This can just help protect your accounts, your privacy and everything. Got some cracking tools on here, including the pin pad scramble, which just jumbles up those numbers. Makes it incredibly difficult for anyone peering over your shoulder to actually see what it is that you're punching in. And family space is also a good one if you've got some sprogs and you're used to handing them your phone in order to placate them and just get them to shut the hell up on car journeys and the like. This just gives them a safe space that they can play around in with only access to the apps that you allow. So as you can see there, my kid can play with the calculator app. I spent absolutely hours playing with my dad's calculator as a kid. Cracking entertainment. Boobies. Classic. And of course you've got the usual excellent gesture control, although some of it I am struggling with now that I'm deeply ingrained in middle age. So I can just about do the camera activation. And of course the old Bruce Lee. And on the software side, Motorola is promising 3 OS updates and 4 years of security patching for the Edge 50 Pro, which is not quite as good as Google and Samsung, but better than some out there for sure. You've also got yourself up to 512 gigs of storage space, depending on how much cache you spaff at Motorola, but it is only UFS 2.2 storage, not the quickest for data transfer. But then of course you do at least have USB 3.1 support, so you've got the likes of DisplayPort, output, etc. As for that 6.7-inch POLED panel, well, this is pretty much the same screen tech as the Ultra model, except not quite as bright. Got a 1220p resolution, so your photos look nice and crisp, video looks plenty sharp as well. And you can expect a good bit of 10-bit color reproduction with Pantone calibration on the natural display mode to keep those visuals as natural looking as possible. Although by default the screen is actually set to vivid mode, which boots the output right up the arsehole region and spaffs out rich, vibrant hues rather than realistic images. And Motorola also reckons that the screen is HDR10 Plus certified, although it's not supported in Netflix at the time that I shot this video. Hopefully that'll be sorted soon. And when you crank up that brightness to the maximum levels, sure, the Edge 50 Pro might not be quite as eye-searing as the Ultra model, but it's certainly bright enough to comfortably use outdoors. I'm going to use this thing in the friggin' desert without having to squint too much, so yeah, I think it'll be fine here in the UK when we do eventually actually get some sun. As for that screen refresh rate, well, this maxes out at 144Hz for your gaming shenanigans, and as you can see there, you can manually set it to 60, 120 or 144Hz. I have unfortunately found that the screen sensitivity here on the Moto Edge 50 Pro has been a wee bit off this past week. So for instance, when I've been gaming on Genshin Impact, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 stabs to actually pick up items. And occasionally when I'm using the camera, my hand flesh will momentarily intrude on the edge of the display and I just won't be able to actually take a picture by bashing that shutter button. It's just one of the perils of having a curved display. As for the audio output, well, you got stereo speakers here on the Moto Edge 50 Pro as you'd expect, with a bit of Dolby Atmos fine tuning.
OnePlus also had a go with its R12D12 AI device, which just looks like one of your mum's love eggs but with a built-in camera.
So as you can hear there, nice and loud when you crank that volume all the way up, but the clarity remains pretty strong, certainly isn't tinny audio by any means. No, there's absolutely sod all headphone jack action here on the Moto Edge 50 Pro, but the Bluetooth streaming's been absolutely fine. You've got a good bit of Snapdragon sound support. And that comes courtesy of Qualcomm's Snapdragon 7 Gen 3 chipset, which is stuffed in here, powering the show, backed by 12 gigs of RAM. Now, it's still early days here on the Motorola Edge 50 Pro. I'm reviewing this ahead of the official UK launch, and yeah, I've got to say that performance has been a wee bit laggy, to say the least. I found this is especially true when you start shooting video. It'll probably be absolutely perfectly behaved now that I'm actually filming it on camera, of course, but sometimes when you start recording a video, it can be supremely laggy just for the first few seconds that you're shooting. And sometimes even when I'm just typing out a message in my email app, you'll notice a serious lag between, you poking and prodding at those on-screen keys and the words actually popping up on screen. It's the same sort of delayed reaction that I'm guilty of whenever I've had 6 double shots of scotch. So here's hoping some Motorola updates can sort that out in a jiffy, but I've got to say that gaming was surprisingly smooth for me once I flipped out that gaming mode and stuck it on the top performance selection. Even running on the highest graphic settings, the frame rate in Genshin Impact stayed particularly stable, and that's over a session lasting well over an hour. Given the juddery behaviour outside of gaming, this was certainly quite a shock, but at least a rather pleasant one. And that gaming mode, like a lot of Motorola's UX, has been spruced up for the Edge 50 series. So as you can see there, you can keep tabs on the various resources and everything, as well as switching up the performance modes. You can tweak the screen brightness, you can block calls and notifications if you don't already have Do Not Disturb on, and also tweak the touch sensitivity, which sadly didn't help for that item pickup shenanigans. As for the battery life, well, Motorola has managed to wedge a 4,500 mAh capacity cell inside of the Edge 50 Pro. And I have found that the likes of gaming on the Edge 50 Pro absolutely slays the battery life. Literally, if you're playing Genshin for an hour on this thing, it'll drain it by about a quarter. And likewise, a good bit of camera action will sap that battery pretty bloody pronto. So, if you're doing a bit of video chatting, for instance, again, you can just watch the percentage meter tick down. So yeah, a few times this past week, I have found I've had to just slip a cable in there just for 5 minutes or so, just to top up the Edge 50 Pro's battery before the evening times. In fact, right now it's 5:30 and I'm down to 8%. Bam. But that's a situation that might well improve again with further updates, just like the performance, fingers crossed. And with general mixed use, you'll still get around sort of 5 to 6 hours of screen on time, which isn't as bad as some that I've tested. But what is fantastic here on the Edge 50 Pro is the 120 watt wired charging support, which absolutely slaps the tits off of Samsung, Google, etc. It should be back up to full in a jiffy, which is certainly handy for those quick 10-minute power-up sessions. You've also got 50 watt wireless charging support. So let's finish up this Motorola blower review with a squint at that camera tech. And what you've got here is a triple lens setup headed up by a 50 megapixel main shooter with an f1.4 aperture and a tasty bit of optical image stabilization. And Motorola's app is reasonably streamlined and easy to get to grips with. You can quickly and easily skip between the different lenses using these wee toggles down here. You've got plenty of settings to play around with, but most of these are hidden away in this settings menu. And you can quickly and easily skip between all of the main camera modes, including good old Pro. And it's fully featured with the ability to shoot in RAW format. And you've also got various AI photo enhancement type shenanigans, which I left on while I was testing out the Moto Edge 50 Pro just out of a morbid curiosity. And the Motorola Edge 50 Pro certainly does a solid job in HDR type situations, producing quite natural results rather than boosting the brightness in darker regions like an iPhone or a Galaxy blower. You'll find there's only slight saturation of colours when the brightness levels are extreme. Tones in general are accurately snapped, and in fact, according to Motorola, Pantone has approved the colours and the skin tones spaffed out by the Moto Edge 50 Pro, promising that natural looking finish. Yeah, even my skin tone, which could perhaps generously be described as slightly flushed post-coitus albino. So as far as everyday well-lit snaps go, I have few complaints with the main snapper here on the Edge 50 Pro. However, in lower light, this phone does struggle with moving subjects, while the inevitable grain also creeps in, and that's despite the wide aperture. But if your subject is compliantly still, then you can always swap to the phone's dedicated night mode, which does produce brighter, sharper pics. And then there's the portrait shots, which generally come out well with some well-defined bokeh style blurring. And then there's the 13 megapixel ultra-wide angle shooter, which is absolutely okay if you want a dramatic shot or you're shooting something massive, and this is also used for macro snaps, coping well with close-up focus. And then there's the 10 meg telephoto shooter with its 3x optical zoom and optical image stabilization, which maxes out at 30x combo zoom, but everything gets a wee bit fuzzy when you push in beyond the 10x zoom level, regardless of any AI sharpening shenanigans. So maybe just don't do that. Tones are a bit skewed with the zoom lens too, so you don't get the same natural looking finish as that primary camera sensor. And then for your video type shenanigans, well, you can shoot up to 4K resolution footage at 30 frames per second, but if you want to boost that to 60 FPS, well, sadly, that does bump down the resolution to 1080p. But thankfully, at the 4K level, you do get some dependable stabilization for moving while you're shooting. And despite the juddery frame rate you'll see on screen during recording, most of my samples were pretty smooth when played back. However, I did see some flickering in a few of my test clips, usually when you're shooting against a bright sky, while the audio pickup has been rather muddy so far in all directions. Here's hoping that it can be fine-tuned in an update soon. And then finally, for the optics here on the Moto Edge 50 Pro, you've got the same 50 megapixel front-facing selfie shooter as that Ultra model. This comes complete with an effective portrait mode, and if you like to take photos of your facial region, well, you probably look less haggard than me for one. And this Motorola blower should do the job as long as you're not stood anywhere too dark and dingy. And it's the same situation when you're shooting video with that selfie camera as well. You can once again max it out at 4K resolution at 30 frames per second. And again, the audio quality, not fantastic. And that right there, my lovelies, in a tasty wee nutshell, is the standout new Motorola Edge 50 Pro. Standing out mostly because, f*** me, it's purple. Yeah, it's got some very meaty rivals around this sort of upper mid-range price point. I'm thinking the likes of the OnePlus 12, which unfortunately does boast superior battery life and camera tech to the Edge 50 Pro. But you know, there's plenty to love here too, including, you know, Motorola's stock Android vibe when it's not being a wee bit janky, and of course those excellent Moto apps. That's what this yammering idiot reckons anyway, but now the important part, what do you guys think? Are you tempted by the Moto Edge 50 Pro? You're going to maybe hold out for the Ultra, or just splash your cash on something else entirely? Be great to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Please do subscribe, ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest and purplest tech, and have yourselves a bloody wonderful rest of the week. Cheers everyone, love you!